Hello, everyone, and welcome to the movie show. My name is Tyler Calkins, and today we're going to be doing the movie review for Doctor Sleep. I'm probably going to start with about a minute of non-spoiler stuff, and then we're going to dive really deep detail into the whole movie. The film had callbacks to the original Shining film and the Shining book, and it had this great story. It was chilling. It had these great horror moments, and for my money, it gave me one of the most disturbing moments and one of the most disturbing scenes I have ever seen on film. You can clearly see that Warner Brothers wanted to make sure that they stayed more faithful to the Stephen King adaptation as compared to what the first Shining film did, and I think that's what got them the Stephen King blessing on this film, which I think worked for them PR wise as well as for the story. Although that said, I'm not sure how much it helped them with the box office given the stories we're hearing about how much money this movie has pulled in over the weekend. But what they did provide was a mostly well cast and well acted horror film. I didn't like the original, but what I did really like was this film. And my concerns there is that I'm not sure if this is really a true sequel to The Shining. I think since I didn't like the original and liked this film, I'm concerned that people who did like the original won't like this film. But that being said, I did have some fans in front of me of the film who seemed to really enjoy it, and they also seem like fans of the original, so we'll see. And maybe part of the fact that it doesn't seem as much of a sequel is the first film was directed by Kubrick, and you can't really, recreate Stanley Kubrick, right? All of that said, we're about to dive into the full deep detail, so full spoilers ahead. If you have not seen the movie and you do not like spoilers, hey, check out, put this in your save later list, come back and watch it then. Or if you're weird and you don't care about spoilers, you just want to watch the review, hey, that's cool. Stick around, hang out, it'll be fun. So that being said, one of the first scenes in the movie is Rebecca Ferguson's character is found by this little girl kind of frolicking through the forest. And it gives you a good sense of her and her crew because she lures in this little girl singing a song, and then she shows her a magic trick. And then all of a sudden the girl is surrounded by Rebecca Ferguson's lackeys. And what happens is that they end up killing that little girl. They show a poster of her with like a missing girl sign later. I thought that was a little It Chapter 2, so I didn't think that was fully necessary. But at least them killing the girl gave you a sense of what they did and them their evilness, so it gave you a tone for them. There are some amazing recreations of some original Shining scenes, and then there's also a lot of backstory that they fill in with. What they do is they recast these characters from the original film, so they give you a newly cast Danny Torrance and a newly cast Wendy Torrance, and they fill in these backstory kind of scenes. Like they have this scene where Danny Torrance finds out how to stuff these demons into a little box, and he learns this from his friend Dick Halloran from the original film. He's recast also by Carl Lumbly, who does a fine job in the film. And young Danny Torrance as a recast does another fine job in the film, but one person who doesn't do a great job with the recast is the Wendy Torrance character. For whatever reason, that actress just doesn't look like Shelley Duvall, and she doesn't act like Shelley Duvall from the original film, so none of that really worked for me on that level. Flash forward a little bit, and you get adult Danny Torrance played by Ewan McGregor, and of course, as always, Ewan McGregor is a phenomenal actor and a real talent, and Obi-Wan and so many other characters, and just who doesn't love Ewan McGregor. So when we first meet Ewan McGregor, he's laying in bed with some naked woman, and he's an alcoholic, just like his father was, but he's like an active alcoholic. They're showing that. So he's laying in this bed with this naked woman. She's got puke all over her. He gets up to puke. It's really disgusting. He comes back and he hears her baby crying, so he puts the baby in her room, in her bed with some Cheez-Its, and he notices he doesn't have any money in his wallet, so he goes to steal her money, and the only reason he doesn't is because Dick Halloran tells him, hey, don't take her money. So then he leaves and, leaves in there and whatever. And then what he does is he heads up north to New Hampshire trying to run away from his problems because he's homeless at that time. He was staying at that girl's house, but he didn't have a home. It really paints a picture of where Danny is. He's homeless. He's laying in somebody else's bed. So he runs up north to New Hampshire, and he runs into a new friend named Billy Freeman, played by Cliff Curtis. He was recently in the Hobbs and Shaw movie, and he really does a fine job in this movie as well. He gets him a job. He gets him some room and board somewhere for cheap, and he tries to help him out. Later on that evening, when he finally finds some place to stay, he has this awful nightmare, and the demon of that woman who he'd left in her bed comes to him, and what she says is basically, oh, my baby was crying, and my neighbors were used to my baby crying because I never helped her out, and I'm really dead, and really they haven't found us yet. And that's really tragic. It puts a lot of, guilt on Danny Torrance's shoulders. And what's worse is, and this was one of the most disturbing moments I've ever seen in film, is you see in her arms something start to roll over, and it's her zombie baby, and the zombie baby cries out, "Mommy." And it was cringy. It was really one of the most disturbing moments I'd ever seen in film. film. So really terrible that Danny's dealing with these things, and it's really because he's an alcoholic and he's trying to battle through that. Fortunately, he ends up getting sober and he starts going to AA, and he gets a job as an orderly doing hospice care, which would seem terrible for Danny Torrance, but again, he can lock away these demons in his boxes. And he gets this job from a guy named Dr. John, who's also a recovering alcoholic, and he's played by Captain Pike himself, Bruce Greenwood. So that's really cool to see him again. He asks Danny Torrance, hey, are you going to be okay with being an orderly? Because most of these people, this is hospice orderly, and most of these people are just dying. And Danny has this great line where he returns back that, no, we're all dying. The world is just a big hospice with fresh air. And it's really angsty Danny Torrance, and you get a lot of that throughout the film. Is just, you can feel like he's a damaged human throughout the trauma that he dealt with as a kid, the alcoholism as an adult, and just all throughout his life dealing with all that. So it's a really, it's a good performance again by Ewan McGregor. He does a phenomenal job. Flash forward 8 years down the line, and Danny's still sober. He's 8 years sober down the road, and the Immortals are still living their life. And you see why Rose and her crew of supernaturals want these kids. Is essentially they don't just kill them. They suck out their life force, and what they call that is the steam. And later on, Rose's boyfriend, who's called Crow, is complaining to her that he needs some additional steam to go find their next kid because they're not getting enough food anymore and they're really hungry. And that's their food, the steam. So she busts open a can, they all breathe it in. That's kind of what they do. They end up kidnapping this kid. And the thing that he's like a baseball prodigy or something like that. And the thing that's most shocking is, like, you walk up to him, they come up to him, like, driving the van, he's walking down the road, and all of a sudden he picks up his head and it's Jacob Tremblay. And I totally forgot he was cast in this movie. So I was really shocked to see Jacob Tremblay in the middle of Dr. Sleep all of a sudden. But we realized the reason that he's cast in this movie is because they needed an actor who could perform the role with such severity. And he's one of the best working child actors in Hollywood right now. And what I mean by severity is the fact that what happens next with that kid ends up being one of the most disturbing scenes I've ever seen on film in my life. So what they do is they kidnap this kid, they drag him out of a van, he's kicking and screaming. Again, Jacob Tremblay giving some phenomenal performance, really selling that fear, that helplessness. It was terrible. It was really bad. So what they do is they tie him down, and, he asks Rebecca Ferguson, are you going to hurt me? And she says yes, and, that's typical villain stuff. And she tells him, the more fear and the more pain you're in, the more pure your steam is. It purifies it, that steam, that life force that she's trying to suck out. And this is the part where normally, you hear a scream and it cuts out, or it cuts out and you see the aftermath of what happened. Not in this movie. What happens at this point is they show you every gruesome detail of them killing this 8 or 9-year-old child. It is brutal. It is vicious. It is one of the most disturbing scenes I have ever seen in my life. For some people, it might be a little bit too far, and I completely understand that. And it's certainly not for the faint of heart. It really is. It's brutal. And then while this is happening, it transitions to this child, Abra, who you'd seen earlier in the film, and she is seeing the whole thing, and she feels the emotional weight of it. So she's also dealing with seeing what's going on. And Rebecca Ferguson's Rose character also sees Abra seeing her. By the way, Abra's played by this girl named Kylie Curran. She's a phenomenal actress in the film. She does a wonderful job. Again, there's really good acting jobs by, like, Rebecca Ferguson, Ewan McGregor, this Kylie Curran, and then some of the side actors do some good work. Just really the only one who does a bad job is that Wendy Torrance recast, and there's another one later on that we're going to get to in a little bit. So obviously Rose feels that the girl is watching her, and she's like, yo, we got to get this girl. We got to steal her steam. And I'm going to suck up all that steam. And Rose tries to get in Abra's head when Abra is following Rose in her mind in a grocery store later on, but Abra totally shuts her out and beats her down. And basically Rose has to resort to sneaking into her house while she's sleeping. And it's a really cool trippy visual where she's like hovering over the earth, and it's kind of vintage for a movie in 2019, but I thought it was really cool looking. I thought it was really great. Rose gets to her house and she sees this huge cabinet of boxes, and she starts bragging about all the boxes she has in her own head of the stuff that she's collected of information, whatever the case may be. And she opens up the boxes and she starts rifling through it, and all of a sudden the drawer closes on her hand really, really hard, and you realize that Abra wasn't sleeping when Rose got there. Abra was awake, and now it's a trap. And, Rose is screaming in pain. She's trying to rip her hand out of the filing cabinet. And it's really a brutal scene because you see her skin just ripping and tearing from her hand. It's brutally shot. It's gruesome. And Abra's talking to Rose, and she's rifling through her papers inside her mind. It's like a big library, and she's stealing her files. And now Rose is the one saying, "Get out of my head," really showing Abra's power. And Abra's a great character. Again, strong, know-how. She talks often in the movie just about, you people deserve this kind of pain, essentially. After this, Danny and Abra work together along with Billy to try to find the glove of that boy who was slain. And they do end up finding him. They find that glove and they bring it back to Abra's house. And Abra's father is ready to kick some ass because he thinks Danny Torrance is some creepy weirdo who's filling his kid's head with some crazy lies. And, Abra tells her father about these stories, but she didn't show him. And Danny asked her to show him, actually put those visuals in his mind, and she does. And what happens is that he realizes that it's really, true what's going on. And so he freaks out. He needs to grab some whiskey, offers it to Danny Torrance, who doesn't want it, obviously, because he's an alcoholic who's recovering. And they go out, they use the glove to track down Rose, and they find out that Rose is actually tracking them down as well. So they decide that they're going to use Abra as bait to drag them in. And what happens is that they drag them in. Abra's sitting on a table, and here comes in the Immortals trying to get, Abra. And one of the lackeys, the Immortals, named Snakebite, comes in and tries to give her a sleeping agent. Snakebite, by the way, is a character who earlier in the film had a cool moment where basically she can make people do what she wants, like make them go to sleep or not, get their hands off of her or whatever. She can just make them do things. I think they called her a pusher. And what happens is that she has the scene where she knocks this married guy out who's going on a date with her, and she's only 15 years old, and he's like 50 or 60, really gross. And what happens is that she says, oh, you can explain to your wife why your wallet's missing, but you'll never be able to explain these. And she cuts 2 bites into his face with her knife. So a snake bite, and that's why that's her name. So anyway, Snakebite drugs Abra, and she's like, oh, I thought this was going to be harder, blah, blah, blah. And what you realize is that Snakebite was under a spell by Abra, and really all Snakebite did was drug a teddy bear. So everybody's like, oh my God, parlor tricks, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, that's when Billy and Danny open fire, and it's a full-on shootout between the Immortals and Billy and Danny. And Billy and Danny end up doing a great job. They basically kill all of the Immortals, and Rebecca Ferguson's Rose is all sorts of devastated about it, obviously so. So they end up killing all, basically, the Immortals, except the one who ends up left is Snakebite. And then what happens is that Danny and Snakebite end up face to face. And Snakebite tells Danny to sleep. She gets his gun. She's going to shoot him in the face. But right before she does, Billy ends up shooting Snakebite. But before she ends up dying, she tells the Billy character to shoot himself in the head. So he ends up dead. Snakebite ends up dead. Basically, everyone's dead except for one character. And that's where Abra realizes that Crow is nowhere to be found. And that's when Crow is in the kitchen where Abra has been sitting and messing with everybody all along, safe in her kitchen, and he gives her the sleeping agent and kidnaps her. And it's such a good scene. It's such a good scene within the movie. It's really well done. It's supremely satisfying to watch these scumbag characters get shot in the face because they're awful and they're, killing kids and sucking their life force so they can be immortal. It's terrible. But then out of nowhere, boom, Crow's there and he kidnaps her, and it's, what are we gonna do? It's well done. It's well shot. It's supremely satisfying. Danny goes back to her house to try to see if he can do anything. Obviously, he's too late. He finds her father's been killed by Crow, and he still finds that bottle of whiskey that Abra's father was drinking earlier in the film. He drives back to the hotel room with the whiskey bottle, and he tries to contact Abra. He can't. He tries to contact his friend Dick Halloran. He can't. And he's got no luck, and he's about to drink the bottle. And again, it's a testament to Ewan McGregor's acting on the film and how good it is, because the anticipation of him about to drink it is so heart-wrenching and so like, oh goodness, it's so tense, suspenseful. And he's about to drink. He's got it right up to his lips. You don't know if he's going to do it. And he smashes the bottle and breaks it. And you're so happy for him because he's got 8 years of sobriety. He's worked so hard. And if he drinks again, he's going to have these demons coming back into his life. This is when he remembers he can hear all sorts of voices anyway without having to communicate directly with her, with Abra. So he decides to find her. He finds her kidnapped in a van driven by Crow at this point. And he tells her to trust him. And what happens next is that he talks about how ignorant and arrogant Crow is. And Crow's like, what are you talking about? And he's basically like, well, you're not wearing a seatbelt. And this is the scene from the trailers where you see Abra turn her hands and control the driving of the steering wheel. And she runs the van into a tree. And he's not wearing a seatbelt. So he slams out of the windshield. He breaks his neck or something and dies. And oh man, Rebecca Ferguson's character is so pissed. And at this point, all that is left is Rose Danny, and Abra, and everybody else is dead. Abra gets picked up by Danny, where he advises they're going to go to Colorado, and this is where you're like, oh man, we're about to go back to the Overlook Hotel. And the reason that he tells her they're going to go there is that he feels like even though it's a danger to him and her to go there, it's probably also a danger for Rose's character. So they decide they're going to go there. They get there and they reach the Overlook Motel, and he tells Abra he doesn't want her to go in yet. He's going to go in alone first. One, he doesn't want her in there any longer than she has to be, but two, he's got to wake the old motel up. So he walks around the motel, which provides us with this wonderful journey through the Overlook all these years later, and it's really just wonderful. And this is where Dr. Sleep the ending of the film starts to be more like the ending of the Shining novel. And again, I think this is why Stephen King is so happy with this film and saying that it redeems the first film, is basically he's finally getting the ending to his book that he wanted in a different movie. And that's fine, because what happens next is, instead of Jack Torrance being the one to go down, here is Danny Torrance being the one to go down to the boiler room, trying to get the boilers too hot to either catch a fire or explode the whole motel. He then comes back upstairs and he walks past the same bar that his father was at when he succumbed to his alcoholism and madness in the first film. And he sits down and he's having a conversation with the bartender, and the bartender's trying to get him to succumb to his alcoholism. And you're thinking it's going to be a moment where, it's going to pick up and it's either going to be a digital recreation or a de-aging or whatever of the original bartender of the scene. And as the conversation goes on, what you realize is he's actually having a conversation with Jack Torrance, his father. And again, this is another recast, and this is what I was talking about earlier, that is just terrible. They recast the character, and the new casted character just isn't good enough. He's terribly acted. I didn't even realize they were trying to do that with this character. Again, he looked nothing like Jack Nicholson, and I understand it's Jack Nicholson. You can't recreate Jack Nicholson, but I needed something better. I didn't even know it was Jack Torrance until they literally hit me over the head with it. The thing that I don't understand is that I feel like it was a really missed opportunity that you could have used to either bring in a digital recreation of Jack Nicholson, and maybe they don't have the digital likenesses, and maybe that's what it's all about, but still, I just feel like missed opportunity. You could have brought in, de-aged Shelley Duvall and de-aged Jack Nicholson and just tried to make that work. They probably don't have the rights, I understand, but it didn't work for me. The new actor just didn't work for me. But what did make the scene work out, and what was really nice about it, is the fact that Danny and Jack have this scene where Danny is talking about when he knows someone is going to die, he starts to see death flies on their face, and he tells the story of the last week of his mother's life, of Wendy's life, and how he couldn't see her face anymore with all the flies around it, and she knew that he couldn't look at her because it was so disturbing. It was just tragic and awful, that he was trying to help her and comfort her, but he couldn't, because he literally could not look at her face with all the flies around it. Really kind of sad and awful scene. Jack is still trying to pressure Danny to have a drink, and that's when Abra kind of breaks him out of his spell and says, hey, Wendy's on her way, or not Wendy's on her way. No, she's not. She says Rose is on her way, and then, he goes out to meet her at the front of the Overlook. He sees that Rose is on her way, and he says, okay, let's go inside. So he brings Abra inside, and when he went inside originally, the lights of the Overlook started to, brighten and turn back on when he wakes up the hotel. But when Abra goes in, those lights go like full-blown bright, and she has the energy. So it's a really cool kind of visual that they do with that. I thought that was a great job. Rose finally comes to the famous room from The Shining that was in the Overlook Hotel, and she sees Abra and Danny standing across the way from them. So it's about to be a standoff, right? Except this time everyone's got a little shine. So everyone's got a little shine in the game. That's going to be a good time. Rose walks in and says, well, hi there. And that's kind of, her tagline throughout the whole film. Every time she's about to kill somebody or suck them into her plan or whatever she was going to do. And every time she said it, I loved it. Rebecca Ferguson was great in this movie. And she tells Abra, basically, if you run away, wherever you run, I will find you, and you will scream for years. And Abra turns back and goes, we'll see who does the screaming. And Abra does not care. Abra is not afraid of you people. She knows her power. She knows what she can do, and you're not going to tell her no. It is wonderfully done, and she's wonderful actress, that Kylie. She's great. What happens is that they boom, right after she says we'll see who does the screaming, they shoot him out into the Overlook Motel maze, and it's all snowy and it's all very much the first Shining, and Rose is chasing after Abra, and she's like, oh, I see you've changed some things in your mind, and Abra goes, how do we know we're not in your mind? And so what happens is that Abra goes all ghosting on Rose and starts coming up behind her and slicing her legs. And this was shot really well in the trailer, or edited well in the trailer, because I thought Rebecca Ferguson had the curved blade, but really it's Abra who has the curved blade. So she comes up behind her, slicing her in the legs, one after the other, until all of a sudden, Rose turns around and catches her by the throat. And she picks her up, and, she's monologuing as villains do, and all of a sudden what you realize is that, and she realizes that we're not in Abra's mind, and you see a box come up behind her, one of those boxes that Danny's been using to capture all of his demons, and you realize you're in Danny's mind, and it's really well done. So she realizes it's a trick, she busts out of it, and then we're back in the real world. And it's really just like so great. It's such a great scene. It's really so shining, so well done. And again, I didn't really like the first film, but this film just really did it for me. Rose and Danny get out of their minds and back into the Overlook, where they have a great scene, and Rose stabs Danny in the leg with an axe, and she hits him in the femoral artery, and all of a sudden what happens is he starts leaking some steam, and she's sucking it up. And she's like, man, where have you been all my life? You are delicious. I'm going to just suck all this steam up, and it's going to be great. And it's awful. And while she's doing that, she looks into his mind, and she sees all these closed boxes that are kind of rattled, and she goes, ooh, what are those? They seem special. And he goes, they're not special, they're starving. And he lets them loose, and all these villains from the original, Shining film come out, and they start attacking her, and they're hungry. They're sucking out her shine, or her steam, and it's really just this great scene, these great callbacks, including the twins. You get the twins again. It's a great scene that's in that film. So after they suck out her shine and kill her, then what happens next is that they start going after Danny Torrance, and it's that scene, where Danny's laying there, and the twins are like, let play with us, Danny, and it's creepy and it's wonderful. So they start to try to take over him. Abra comes back into the hotel to try to save Danny, and she's like, hey, let's go do this. And what she realizes is that Danny is not himself, and she starts getting chased by Danny, who's carrying an axe, in a very kind of turnaround situation where, Jack Torrance running through the hotel. Now it's Danny Torrance running through the hotel chasing, somebody, a child in this instance. And this is where, again, it's a callback to the original novel ending, not the film, is where Danny ends up meeting up with Abra, and he tries to kill her. He swings it, over the axe to her head. And what happens is she looks to him and says, this isn't you, Danny, you're wearing a mask. And that's a callback to the original book. And again, sure why Stephen King is very happy with this movie. So he snaps out of it and tells her to run away, and she does, and then he starts going back into a shining moment, and he drags himself down to the basement, because again, all these ghosts are trying to save the hotel because that's their source of power, and they can't do it. The fire breaks out, starts to burn the hotel down, and what happens is that Danny has this great scene, and he sees his mother, and he's a younger child again, and he doesn't see any flies on her face, I assume is what they were going for. And it was a really nice scene where they, got to spend some time together as the hotel burned down. Cuts away from there, and what happens is they're back in Abra's room, and, Danny's standing there, and they're talking, and, she's like, I knew that you were going to be okay out of it. When I heard the moaning of the hotel burning down, essentially. And you think everything's okay, but what actually happens is that Danny died in that hotel, and he's just, projecting himself from the death, and not a demon, but, he's just a dead soul, and she can see that. Whew, that was a phenomenally frightening film. Frightening enough that during a really tense scene in the movie, I was really tensed up, and somebody crossed my vision coming back from the bathroom, and I jumped. I mean, I'm a naturally jumpy guy anyway, but still, it was a scary moment. What was cool, my audience did skew a little bit older, so I'm not sure if that is what's going to affect the breakdown in the box office. If it's the fact that mostly it's older people who went to go see this movie, because my audience skewed a little bit older, but I think everybody should go see this movie because it was actually really good. Also, there were two dudes in front of me who seemed like they were pretty big Shining fans, original Shining fans, and they were super stoked throughout the whole movie, especially right before we were getting ready to go back to the Overlook Hotel, and anytime they had some, original Shining stings in the score, they were, super stoked and yeah, a little bit. So I thought that was really cool. I thought that was fun to watch. Overall, an awesome film that makes me want to go back and watch the original Shining again. I think when Dr. Sleep comes out on digital, and it's like a 2-pack, The Shining and Dr. Sleep, I'll buy it then. But at least it makes me want to go watch the original, and I didn't like that film, and this made me want to go back and do that, so maybe it does improve that original. That's been my review of Dr. Sleep. What did you think of the film? Comment down below. Are you somebody who comes in and watches a spoiler review without seeing the movie? Because that's kind of weird, but cool for you. Does this get you more hyped for it if that's who you are? If not, did you watch the movie? And comment down below. What did you like about the film? What did you not like about the film? The recasting, did that not work for you? Didn't work for me, a lot of it. A lot of the important ones anyway. So comment down below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the bell. That way you don't miss any of my new content. As always, I appreciate you watching. We'll see you soon. Bye.